Speaking on this topic of marriage, remarriage, and intimacy is, I think, something that we've lost, and it's about not only the pragmatic aspects of marriage. There's plenty of people who would do probably a far better job than me. Not probably, I know they would, in this case. But my concern is, what's the vision? What's the vision, the understanding? And the Proverbs 29 says, my people perish for lack of vision. They will perish. The reason they get it, in fact, in the Septuagint Greek, it says anarchia, they fall into anarchy. They go into anarchy without vision. If I gave you wood, hammers, nail, but didn't tell you you were to make a bench, you could sit there and bang on the wood and nails all you want. So the idea of having the vision, the perspective, is really important. So I'm going to share from the foundation of the mindset of the people of the Scriptures and their context, first and foremost, of course. And we're going to touch on that and move through Jesus, the Apostolic Church, and into the communities that came after that. And I think it's really important. Some things you're going to hear might have a little different bent, and some of that is because we have really lost, I think, quite frankly, the Semitic frame of mind that Jesus and the apostles had to begin with. And I'm very much trying to say, how do we reframe that back in their context again? And that's why a lot of us miss half of what the gospel is trying to talk about, because we've so plugged Jesus into our cultural context that we've lost his, and it becomes tantamount to having like those wonderful old pictures when I was a kid where you see in these Sunday school books Jesus blonde-haired and blue-eyed, which he was, of course, anything but that. And it doesn't mean that we have to become literally the culture of Jesus and the apostles in a literal sociological sense, but we have to understand how God reveals himself and then telescopes into our context and culture. Going into marriage, into Scripture, starts right off with the beginning, with Genesis. And Jesus, and I'll repeat this probably a couple times along the way, Jesus always goes back to God's constant and original intent, which he finds in the story of Genesis. And in it we see God creating, but what is the purpose God creates? If we were to ask somebody, why did God make us? Why did God make humanity? What kind of answers would we get along the way? And I think we need to see it, and it would be that they'd be wrong answers. God made us for his love, God made us to share, etc., etc., etc. But I think we need to fill in the picture a little bit more. And as we listen to the stories or hear these stories, and this is important for how we hear Scripture anyway to begin with, the purpose of Scripture is not just telling us a story to just, oh, isn't that nice, and it's a nice narrative, and look for just a moral meaning. They actually go farther beyond that. The purpose of sharing the narratives is to let the narrative inhabit us, and for us to inhabit the narrative. So it's not just, oh, isn't that nice, once upon a time, blah, blah. No, it is how does that fit into, not only fit into our lives, but how do we fit into the whole narrative? So when an Israelite would hear these stories, it was not just, oh, isn't that nice about our past, and what does it mean for me in some practical vein about living my life? It is, no, how does my story fit into the larger narrative? And that in the narrative, in ancient Israel, narrative had a goal. That God was moving us in a certain direction. Scripture understands time in a linear fashion. In a linear fashion. There's a beginning, but there's a goal, a destiny that's in mind. And so, reading whatever it is, the Gospels, the Old Testament, whatever, it is, how does my life fit into that narrative? Now, one thing that's very important to understand in the world, and we're going to get into that, is that spiritual realities are physically expressed. There is no dualism like the ancient Greek philosophers, okay? Where the spiritual was here, material world was here, they're separate, and they may kind of meet, but we don't know if they do or not, and so on and so forth. This is clearly, in their mindset, heaven and earth, spirit and matter overlap. They overlap. There is no separation. There may be a distinction, but there is no separation between the two. Okay? And a lot of Christians don't realize how they bought into Greek philosophy and not biblical ways of thinking, quite frankly. So spiritual realities are physically expressed. God himself communicates through physical reality. God uses physical reality. Okay? and that whatever happens spiritually and physically, there are consequences in that way. So what happens physically, for instance, has an organic consequence spiritually, and whatever is going on spiritually will have a physical consequence. There's a great line from one of the fathers and mothers of the church in a book called the Philokalia, which means love of the good, that says, great are the sins that the soul commits against the body. The fact that they're so intertwined. What somebody is experiencing, feeling, believing within is what will be physically expressed. So physical expression is not negligible at all, not in their mind. Okay. God's purpose for creation, for humanity. Okay? God makes Genesis 1, he makes creation. And at the crown of it, he makes, you could actually say in Hebrew, earthlings. There's great play on the word Adamah for earth and Adam for man or human, and so forth. He makes earthlings male and female. There's something about male and female together that express something about God that male and female isolated from each other would not be able to express. Okay? That isolated from each other. And one of the things that this shows is that God desires a partnership. God has made this creation, but he has structured everything to have this humanity in an intimate partnership. Not just a business partnership, not just a stop in whenever you can, but a intimate, lifelong lifestyle partnership to cultivate and bring creation to a destiny, a certain end. And that this creation is given and is a means through which God will communicate himself to the earthlings. The earthlings will use as an expression to communicate and connect with God and each other. So creation is not the end unto itself. It is a means to connection, to communion is a word we would use later. Okay? To an intimate communion with him. All right? Now, creation and human beings are made innocent, but they are not. They are not, contrary to little Bible stories we've heard, they are not complete. They are not perfect. They are innocent, but they are not perfect. Okay? This may blow out some Sunday school imagery here, but they are not perfect. They're mature. Yes, all their potential is there, but they have not arrived at fulfilling their potential yet. Okay, very important here. Very important. They're on the way, and they can only continue that way and achieve the destiny through constantly remaining connected with the senior partner, as it were, God himself. And, by the way, God is the goal. He is the destiny. But in that destiny is the only way these earthlings can become fully human. They can only become fully human to the degree they're connected to him. Without that, they're less than human. Okay? And to show that this is a very serious and real partnership, something that can only happen between male and female potentially is the fact of being part of the life-creating, birthing process. There's something awesome in all that shows and reflects something that in a same-sex situation could never happen, by the way, and that's partly in their mindset. But that the male and female together show something of normative partnership with God, that God has actually invited us to participate and be involved in the life-creating process. That's mind-blowing. That's mind-blowing. We're not just supposed to sit around here like a bunch of ants and you know, get an education, maybe go to school, get a job, get married, have kids, retire, play golf, and then have a nice funeral, and that's it.
We are here to play golf, though, right?
Golf isn't golf,
Depends on how good it is. But you hear what I'm saying. It's not that those things are bad by any stretch. Jesus talks about, though, taking good things and using them as an excuse, as something to hide behind and not deal with the realities in our own life. Okay? Quick example is, follow me. Well, I just got married. Follow me. Well, I just bought a nice piece of property. I got to go check it out. Follow me. My dad just died. I got to go bury him. Those are all good things. The problem is they became an excuse for not following Jesus. Okay. Marriage itself then is defined by God. The relationship between the man and the woman in the Genesis story is defined by God. Sexuality, okay, which a major byproduct of sexuality, of course, can be the result of having children, is defined by God, and it's something He shares with us to reflect something about Him. Something about Him. It's a reflection of His own passionate love. He's giving us a taste of His own passionate love that He has for us. That marriage in a very specific form and the intimacy within marriage is supposed to be a taste of that reality. A real taste of that reality. It is the sacrificial giving, offering, sharing back. And even the word koinonia, the word communion, implies, more than implies, it assumes a reciprocity. The word communion, before St. Paul coined it in 1 Corinthians to refer to what some people refer to as the Lord's Supper or Eucharist, communion, and so on and so forth, was a word that described the intimate sharing between a husband and a wife, even in the physical expression of it, which tells you something about their understanding about bread and wine and so forth. Again, spiritual realities are physically expressed. Circumcision, okay? Circumcision, which, jumping after the fall, I'm not going to talk about the whole this second, but after humanity, as it were, in the Genesis story, kind of blows it, stunts their growth towards God and stunts their human development, literally. God's looking for people to reinstate the partnership with. And He finds Abraham. Tried Noah. Things were okay, and that's a beautiful, by the way, sidebar, that's not a story of punishment. Noah and the ark and the flood, that's a story of rebirth. Water, Scripture loves the image of water. Those people love water. It symbolizes both death and rebirth. But anyway, things don't work out after Noah, God's trying to start over, and things don't work out too well, so He finds Abraham. And He says to Abraham, I want to create a people with you through whom I will bless the earth. I'm going to give you children through whom the earth will be blessed. Not just for you, not just because you can say, oops, I thought I'd turn this down. Not just so you could have, say, I have kids and I went to a father-daughter dance with my girl, or when I'm old, I will have somebody to take care of me and all that kind of thing, as it were. You are going to be given descendants in order to bless the world, to bless the earth. And anybody remember what physical expression Abraham gave to that agreement between him and God? Circumcision. Why circumcision? Okay. Now a lot of the religions all around Abraham this is not an unusual thing among the Semitic peoples, circumcision. But circumcision is very powerful because of two things, and I find it plays in. Number one, and this is part of in the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent, by the way. The serpent is symbolic, not just of later it would become a symbol of the devil. It becomes a symbol of the fertility religions around Israel of the time, that you could achieve immortality just by procreating. You can control things. You can control your immortality. Just keep cranking out kids, and your kids, you will live through your children. And the point of the fruit even is the idea that we're going to take control. The serpent goes, you can't trust God, that He loves you, He's going to take care of you, so have a piece of fruit. And by the way, in the story, people don't get this. Eve's not by herself. Adam's standing there. He's right there when it's happening. Okay? So he's just as much in this. He's not stopping her. They both partake and organically ingest into their very being the toxin of becoming intimately one with good and evil at the same time. It becomes part of them. You are what you eat. Eating is a very major reality, even a spiritual reality within Scripture. Anyway, now, the idea of immortality. So circumcision is clearly number one. I control the birthing process, not you. This sign of being able to give birth, that's mine, God says, not yours. I'm sharing it with you. And number two, that organ down there is not there to do with whatever you want. It's mine. I'm sharing it with you. It's not your personal possession. Your whole body's not your personal possession. Okay? Very clearly understood by these people in that way. Physical intimacy had to do with God and the boundaries God sets. Okay? And we see this even in the semi-humorous story where after trying to have a child, Abraham and Sarah, it's not succeeding, and they're going to help the process out. They're going to help God out. And so Sarah says, take my maid. They took control. They took control. And when God appears in Genesis 17 to Abraham, by the way, in the form of three strangers, which early Christians picked up very quickly, and says, I'm going to give you the child I promised you. And Abraham goes, oh no, he's over there. And the Lord goes, that's not the kid I promised you. You took control of this. And as people have sometimes observed, Ishmael, being the child of Hagar, becomes the father of the Arabs, and Isaac becomes the father of the Jews, and the Arab-Israeli conflict is actually Abraham's fault for trying to take control of things, is the joke, as it were. Anyway, but going on, see, and the purpose of having a child is for the purpose of blessing the world, blessing the earth, to bring the earth, all of creation, not just people, but the whole of creation to the destiny that God intends. Very important. Marriage, therefore, is seen within and part of a larger community, a larger picture. Marriage is not just about me and my spouse. And not just because of the psychological realities that any couple that just stays within themselves will implode in the end, and they will. Because relationships, we're not built to take the full weight. You got married as part of and within a larger community. Okay? And when you got married, now I understand back in those cultures, and even probably not too recently in some of them, marriages were arranged. But I think what we can take from that is not that we should have arranged marriages necessarily, but there is a discerning process. And in the story of Isaac, having a bride found for him is the idea of having God in on the picture to discern, but through people. God works with people. There's a great line from St. Augustine I love, that without God we can do nothing, without us God will do nothing. God has structured things to be in that partnership with us. So how we get married, who we get married to, is also part of a larger discerning process. That's assumed. That's assumed. Not just I'm attracted to them, they're attracted to me, hormones are flying around or whatever, blah, 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 and blah.
Take questions yet?
Do I take questions yet? I'll take a question.
You were saying about how the birth of the child is for the earth. Could you elaborate on that? How does the birth of a child benefit the earth?
How does the birth of the child benefit the earth? It's actually the birth of the child God has in mind, no matter what the parents were thinking. The birth of the child is brought about by God for the purpose of participating in the larger plan to redeem and rescue and bring the earth to its full completion. Does that make sense? Okay. Just a quick note about the fall of humanity. Something we need to understand again, that human beings were not seen as perfect. They were not complete. Even the rabbis, the early ancient rabbis would say, if human beings were complete and perfect, why were they so stupid to eat a piece of fruit and blow the whole thing? This is like a little kid, I want to try it. Why can't I stick my fingers in a wall socket? This kind. Okay, but I think the way we need to understand it is what has happened to us as a race, and this is important as we get into talk about marriage and relationships in general, is that if I had a graph, I would show you okay, here's where humanity starts, and here's the final destiny. Okay, and they started, and along the way suddenly they stunted their growth, And not that they fell from the great height, but they were on the way, they stunted their growth, and it really parallels, in my mind, the idea of how, do you ever hear when somebody has some trauma in their childhood? Whether they were sexually abused, they started doing drugs, alcohol, and how they will emotionally stay the same age. No matter if chronologically they get, you're right? They can have 1,500 PhDs, they can have this, that, and the other thing, but emotionally they are stunted at that age. And what we have is a human race that has stunted itself and passed on, as it were, that bacteria of being stunted and broken. Okay? If I let my 6-year-old, could you imagine letting my 6-year-old babysit?
Not a good idea.
But think of that in terms of how people approach marriage, relationships, if they were emotionally.
Now, Father, look, I want to see if I have this right in my mind. So what you're saying is that before the fall, Adam and Eve were not perfect.
Right.
They were not perfect.
Right. In fact, if you take the story literally, and as some of the ancients did, St. Basil the Great would actually envision that God made Adam as a baby. Not, we've been ruined by Sunday school, folks. Okay. All the Sunday school books I've ever seen of Adam and Eve is, as soon as they're created, they're full-blown, complete adults. And that's not the sense of the story among the ancient Israelites.
Okay, so, all right, so, because I always thought they were, full-blown, woman and man.
Right.
And that they were perfect in the sight of God.
They were good. They were complete. It's okay. The image of, for those of us who have kids, all right. Having watched my children be born, all the potential is right there, and I can say, that it was good, like God says in the creation story. But good does not mean complete. Complete.
Right, okay. That makes sense.
My daughter was perfect when she was born. The APGAR test and all that kind of all right? But don't feel bad. But, they can't talk to you. They're pooping their brains out. They're sleeping. They wait till you get your best suit on to show you what they had for lunch. This kind of stuff. All right? And that's where humanity is right now. Look how crazy we are. We're pooping, we're puking, we're eating whatever is put in front of us, like little kids stuffing candy in our mouths. We do that as individuals, we do that as a country, we do that as a world.
Right. But I think that speaks to the point. Whether Adam and Eve were adult, quote-unquote adult when created, or whether they were infants when created, what adult isn't still an infant when it comes to some aspect?
Right, exactly. That there's some level of this, because it's not just the physical. See, we could focus on the physical and miss the actual other reality. And one of the, real fast, just from the point of ancient Israel, is they hadn't partaken of the tree of life yet. So actually, there's a sense, they weren't immortal even. They were not immortal.
As Sunday school would have you believe.
The sense of it is, God's going, keep them away from the tree. Because right now the condition they're in, if it stays that way, that's not what I want them to stay that way. So,
I have a question too.
sure you do. No,
Sorry. I didn't check with my husband first on this.
Oh, you're right.
But,
And you always check with him. That's it.
well, I hear this in the context of non-Orthodox Christians. I hear them asking the question, why does God allow suffering? And why doesn't he just come down and fix everything? And I mean, to me, it's in all the context of God's plan, and I don't know how, as an Orthodox Christian, to kind of express that, and what the Orthodox Church would answer to that question.
Well, for centuries, it's the answer that centuries have real fast is God's not codependent. All right, he's not going to enable us all the way through this process. He's actually in the partnership. He wants us to take responsibility. But things happen. So things happen, sometimes, yes, because of our own personal sins. Sometimes because of the sins of people immediately within our lives' proximity. And sometimes just because, after all that, the whole world has been spiritually polluted. But how then, in the situation we're in, do we allow the reality of God to invade these realities? Okay? And it doesn't mean there's always a clear answer to this. That's part of the point of the book of Job. God answers Job not by telling him why he's suffering, but talking about me. You don't know me, Job. John chapter 9, the blind man. Lord, why is this man blind? Did he do some sin or his parents sin? The thing is how to participate in the reality of God in that middle of all that. And one last thing I think I'll say with that is, because the Bible loves birthing imagery. I mean, water is a birthing image. They knew about birth, okay? And having seen this 5 times directly, it's a mess. It is not the process you want to go through if you're a control freak. It's messy. Modesty goes out the window, da-da-da-da-da-da, and so on and so forth. But life happens. And that's the beauty of reading, Genesis. That incredible, the wording is poetic. I mean, this chaos, this craziness that's going on, and God is birthing life. He's playing the midwife, as also being the bridegroom that helped inaugurate the process. Does that help? Okay. Back to marriage. Which sometimes is a mess. Anyway. Marriage